Marquee D.
Factions, stables, cliques, call them whatever you want, but the fact is TNA loves a good takeover storyline just like I love free food. And when there's a takeover, there's usually a faction involved. TNA had so many over the years that I've lost count, probably due to so many former WCW employees coming through the company and trying to capture the former NWO glory. Factions can be great when done right. Problem is, for every DX there's a Truth Commission. I've judged these factions based on belts held, win-loss records, and if they accomplish their original goal. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and without further ado, here are the 6 worst factions in TNA history. Number 6, the Aces and Eights. Some people liked this one and others didn't. It all started out well. A huge mass biker faction ran roughshod over the TNA roster and created chaos for months. The beauty was nobody knew for sure who the members were. It could have been anyone. Problem was, as the members gradually revealed themselves, or had their mask forcibly taken, it was one disappointing reveal after the next. First it was Devon Dudley. Okay, older guy, still a good wrestler, not too bad. Next it was Doc, the former Luke Gallows. At least he looked like he fitted in a biker faction, but he was just another WWE cast-off. We also got Knox, who was for some reason renamed Nux. I could buy these men in a biker faction, but the rest of the members left me scratching my head more than Mr. Anderson. One of the big reveals was D'Lo Brown. Yes, this D'Lo Brown. Bit of a change of personality for him. I loved D'Lo in the Attitude Era, but for God's sake, look at the shape he's in. He's not going to wrestle, so what's the point? And worse still, he was revealed as being the vice president of the faction. Why, for God's sake? It was later revealed that due to D'Lo's backstage role in the company, he was able to get the next 2 members, Wes Briscoe and Garrett Bischoff, into the company. Look, I covered this in my last review, but I am not a fan of Wes and Garrett. They just dragged this faction down. There was no need to add 2 pointless young guys, but at least Wes kind of looked like he could fit in a biker faction. Tito Ortiz was the next reveal, and this has to go down as one of not only the worst TNA debuts, but the worst wrestling debuts in history. The former UFC star just walked out to the ring with his arms folded, looking like a gormless moron, while the crowd barely reacted. I can't really blame them, as he hadn't been relevant in 8 years at this point. It was just another example of TNA pushing celebrities who weren't proper stars. TNA were being forced by their TV network Spike to push the former UFC star, as they wanted to push the upcoming fight in Bellator between Tito and Quinton Jackson. Tito stuck around for a month and a half doing literally nothing but standing around, possibly with his arms folded, before he was pulled from TNA by Bellator. After all of that, the fight between Quinton and Tito didn't even take place. This all made TNA look second rate. Taz filled the heel commentator role, and was unbearably bad, mispronouncing wrestler names, arguing with other commentators constantly, and not giving a damn about his job. For God's sake, TNA, the little midget sat at the commentary desk every week promoting the Aces and Eights. Just go and get him. It won't be difficult. Send anyone. Go get rid of him. I'll do it for you. So, was there actually anyone worth a damn in this faction? They did have Mr. Anderson, who ended up becoming the vice president before eventually causing the downfall of Aces and Eights, and the leader was Bully Ray. He was excellent and played a heel champ so well. It was great to see him breaking out and doing something new. For a short time, Brooke Tessmacher played his on-screen girlfriend, and she complimented him very well. Overall, the faction was just full of scrubs, and they would constantly lose matches. It felt like Anderson was only added to try and bring some much-needed star power, and everyone who wasn't named Bully Ray was an afterthought. They were originally meant to be more members. Ivelisse Velez represented them at a one-night-only pay-per-view, and a member known only as Mike was seen. Different members were given different titles, but they weren't explaining what they actually meant. Devon was Sergeant at Arms, for example, and Doc was the Director of Chaos. What did any of this mean? The whole story dragged on for around 17 months, and you could count their victories on one hand. It all got very boring once the members were revealed, and the intrigue was gone. The only person who massively benefited from the storyline was Bully Ray. Anderson also benefited a little bit, as he became the one to end the faction by beating Bully Ray. Overall, the best thing to come out of this storyline happened on the next week of Impact, where they held a funeral for the Aces and Eights. They basically threw the whole storyline under the bus and pointed out all its failures breaking kayfabe. Look this up if you can, it was excellent. And if I missed anything out, don't worry, I'm planning on covering this storyline in more detail in the coming weeks. Number 5, EV2. EV2 were a collection of ECW originals who invaded TNA in 2010. They were granted their own pay-per-view to say goodbye and thank you to the fans. I won't go too much into that one, that's going to be saved for another day. That alone was harmless enough, and it was great seeing all these veterans for one last time. Problem was, the majority of them hung around after the Hardcore Justice pay-per-view, and Dixie was handing out contracts like it was going out of fashion, and faction warfare soon ensued. They feuded with Ric Flair's Fortune stable, who consisted mainly of TNA originals, but to make things worse, EV2 for some reason were joined by Brian Kendrick, who at this stage was at his most weirdest, wrestling without shoes and speaking poetry. I guess they thought they may as well just dump all the crazy people into the same group. Shame Abyss was busy at the time. After all the EV2 members were defeated in separate matches at the No Surrender pay-per-view, the feud still continued for another 3 months. At the next pay-per-view, EV2 defeated Fortune in a lethal lockdown match. Eventually Rhino switched sides, going with Eric Bischoff, and Sabu and Raven were both fired for losing matches. I don't want to go too much into the individual members involved, it was just the ECW guys, you know who they are, but the point is they took up insane amounts of screen time when most of them should have been tucked up at home with a mug of hot chocolate watching the Antiques Roadshow. The Fortune guys were supposed to be the heels in the feud, but their reason for hating the ECW guys was completely justified. It was the TNA guys' company, the ECW guys had invaded it, and they were now taking screen time away from the young guys who had built the company. Maybe this feud would have worked better if the face-heel dynamic had been switched. Number 4, The Revolution. In 2014, James Storm was harassing Sanada and mocking his mentor, the Great Muta. Sanada would later align himself with Storm. He was also shown in an abandoned shack torturing a tied-up Sanada, and eventually rebranding him as the Great Sanada. Together they abducted X-Division wrestler Manic, who was a masked TJ Perkins, and he endured much the same treatment that Sanada had previously. Later Abyss joined, and him and Storm would capture the tag belts together, which was probably the one and only high point of this faction. Next, Mahabali Shera joined the faction, and was forcibly made to change his name to Koya when he was abducted by James Storm into the hut. These segments were giving off a Roots vibe, as he was repeatedly asked to change his name to Koya until he agreed. Each member separately was talented in their own way, but they just didn't fit together. I think they were going for Storm leading a cult of misfits. They should have added Shark Boy to the mix. It got even darker when Storm tried to persuade Mickie James to join the Revolution. She refused and Storm pushed her onto some train tracks. This was very controversial at the time. Not to worry, last I checked, Mickie is alive and well in WWE. They also added female wrestler Serena Deeb to the stable, although she wasn't tortured in the hut. The stable split up not long after Storm had superkicked Sanada and Koya out of the faction for failing in matches. The whole thing had a Ministry of Darkness mixed with the Oddities vibe to it, and it just didn't lead anywhere. Well, that was a year wasted. Storm would leave the company not long after, but would return 6 months later after his brief spell in NXT. I think the whole point in the storyline was to give wrestlers an identity and to be part of something. Well, congratulations boys, you were part of one of the worst factions in TNA history. Number 3, the TNA Frontline. Formed in 2008 in response to the Main Event Mafia, who had been raging a war for respect against the young guys. The group mostly consisted of TNA original and younger guys who had been victims of the Mafia. However, unlike the Mafia, the Frontline was a disorganised rabble with no clear members, leaders or consistency. You could say Joe or AJ were the leaders, but nothing was concrete, as they were just the ones leading the charge against the Mafia. They were constantly embarrassed and put to shame in the ring and on the mic by the Mafia. If you get a chance, look up the Scott Steiner promo on them, it was great. Quite a few people battled for TNA Frontline, but due to a lack of consistency, the lineup constantly changed and it just seemed to be a different person week in, week out. Other than AJ or Joe, you had Petey Williams, Eric Young, ODB, Consequences Creed and Jay Lethal. The Motor City Machine Guns were also reluctant members. There were also older guys who joined, like Team 3D, Rhino and Mick Foley. The problem is with the angle, when you're going up against 5 former world champions in Sting, Nash, Angle, Booker T and Scott Steiner, it's going to be hard to match them, and Joe and AJ were the only real main eventers with any star power in the Frontline. Mick Foley constantly had to rally the troops, and it reinforced the fact that they weren't on the same level as their competition. Christian was invited to join the Frontline, but he didn't want any part of it, which made them look a bit worthless. He left the company shortly after. In 2009, a new faction had formed called the World Elite, led by Eric Young, who then merged with the Main Event Mafia. Joe had also joined the Mafia, and all the belts were held by Mafia members. The Frontline was silently dropped as all members now went their own separate ways, and the war was most certainly lost without hardly a whimper. The Mafia fell apart around Slammiversary when the British Invasion beat Booker T and Scott Steiner for the tag belts, and Eric Young beat Nash for the Legends title. Booker T left the company just after. So after all that, a combination of infighting and the World Elite basically defeated the Mafia. Not much credit was given to them either. Angle disbanded the Mafia just after, but Steiner refused to accept that and said as long as he was still in TNA, the Mafia would still exist. He still demanded respect from the young punks. Steiner left TNA just after. Number 2, Serotonin. Bit of an older one here from 2006. Serotonin is a brain chemical which regulates moodiness and depression. I certainly felt a bit of this whenever these guys were on TV. Consisting of Raven, Kaz, Johnny Devine and Matt Bentley. This was another version of Raven's Flock, which we saw in WCW and ECW several times. They were supposed to be creepy and gothic, and with Raven as leader, he would often beat down his teammates with a kendo stick after the matches. He said he didn't care about whether they won or lost. He said he was only interested in causing psychological damage to their opponents, which is appropriate as they had an appalling win-loss record. Divine would later be renamed Havoc, Kazarian would have his name shortened to Kaz, and Maverick Matt Bentley changed his name to Marta. The commentary team openly laughed about their win-loss record. Way to build up an intimidating, scary gimmick, TNA. The gimmick surprisingly did little for Raven, and Divine and Bentley were just mindless followers. Kaz benefited the most from it as he would defy Raven and it would lead to a feud between the two. Kaz ended up winning the feud, but all he really accomplished was beating up a jobber faction, who I could have probably beaten. There wasn't much to gain from beating any of them at this point. During their entire run, the faction only won twice on pay-per-view, and both times were dark matches, so nobody saw it anyway. Bentley would leave the company just after this, and Raven and Havoc would feud with Abyss before going their separate ways. On a side note, don't you think Divine looks like the Hamburglar here? Number 1. The Death Crew Council. First of all, not a fan of the name, it just sounds like 3 random words thrown together. And which one is it anyway, a crew or a council? A council isn't intimidating, it sounds like something my dad would be employed by. The angle started in mid-August 2016 after Storm was pinned by Lashley and lost his King of the Mountain title in suspicious circumstances. The following week, Storm called out referee Brian Hebner, who had missed a 3 count earlier on in the match. Storm should have won. This led to TNA President Billy Corgan hitting the ring, and an argument started between him and Storm. Storm ended up getting suspended indefinitely. Over the next few weeks, vignettes were shown with 3 masked men with disguised voices. They eventually debuted attacking wrestlers. Nobody knew who they were. If this sounds familiar so far, that's because it's almost the same as the start of the Aces and Eights. They ended up feuding with the Hardys in their Broken Universe in some well-produced segments. The following week, the 3 members voluntarily unmasked in the ring. First came Eddie Kingston, who got no reaction from the crowd whatsoever, and the commentators asked, who is this guy? The second man turned out to be Bram, who hadn't been seen since he was abducted by the Decay months earlier, and the last member was James Storm. They said they'd come together to fight the Office, who had branded the 3 not good enough. Within a month, they had been beaten by the Hardys in a couple of high-profile matches, and they just seemed like an afterthought. Nothing about the group was explained well, and ultimately it all seemed rather pointless. Bram wasn't exactly a team player and just suited being a psychopath on his own. Admittedly, I knew little about Kingston before he came into the company, but I'd heard great things about him. But when he showed up, he just looked like an overweight cab driver, and I seriously don't remember him winning a single match. They stuck around till March when tension was teased in the group, and Storm super kicked both Bram and Kingston. I believe that this was TNA's final attempt to push James Storm into the main event scene. The problem was that this was an idea from Billy Corgan, who at the time was part owner of TNA. The tug of war for power of TNA was going on behind the scenes, and Corgan was gone from TNA not long after the angle started. New booker Dutch Mantell didn't seem to be a fan of the angle, and the company seemed desperate to distance themselves from anything relating to Billy Corgan. James Storm has since said that the angle was going to continue through to at least Slammiversary in June, where he'd defeat Bobby Lashley with help from a 4th member of the group. I wonder who that might have been. There would have been lots of intrigue at this point, and then yup, you guessed it, Jeff Jarrett. Look, no one was a bigger James Storm fan than myself, but I don't know why they couldn't have just let him be him. The beer-swilling, fun-loving, fiery cowboy. That's what brought him to the dance, that's what we paid to see. Not a serious wrestler in a suit and mask, and definitely not a psychopath who brainwashes and kidnaps people. TNA missed the boat on Storm multiple times, and unfortunately it looks like his 8-day world title reign will never be surpassed as Storm left the company a year after the DCC storyline began. So, do you agree with my picks? Leave your comments and suggestions down below. I post TNA content every week. Don't forget to subscribe.